Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Harvard Centers for International Development's Road to GEM speaker series. My name is Kevin Nguyen. I'm a student ambassador at the center and currently studying at the School of Public Health. Here at CID, our mission is to build a thriving world for all. And we work across the university and a global network of researchers and practitioners to build an international pool of talents, conveys academic and practitioner network, and deploy breakthrough research to address the world's most pressing challenges. Through our Road to GEMS event this spring, we're focusing on reimagining international development. As we all know very well, the past year has brought a dramatic shift in global development, including significant aid cuts around the world, volatile markets, and intensifying geopolitical tensions. So GEMS 26 will look into the present challenge and pathway forwards. The emphasis will be on the actions so that we have pathways to collectively promote and pursue evidence-informed solutions. And GEMS will take place in early May. With that in mind, we are so excited about today's conversations on the topic from compassion to capacity, narrative accountability and perception politics. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes that please feel free to enjoy lunch and help us reduce waste. Let all the food container, utensils, and napkins are compostable. We'll hold questions until Q&A. I'll come around with the mic when the time comes. Today's session is on record. It's being recorded for CID YouTube channel with the camera on the speaker only. So photos may be taken for CID social media. So if you prefer not to be appear on any of them, just let the team's member know. Don't forget to scan the QR codes around the room to check in. This will help us plan future events. And finally, follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Harvard CID and sign up for our newsletter to stay connected. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Michael Rain. So Michael is a practitioner, researcher, and scholar working at the intersection of storytelling, technology, and public policy. His work focused on how narratives shape global perceptions and influence how communities are understood and engaged. He has advised and delivered remarks to the government and industry leaders, including the US Department of State, Google, Morgan Stanley on storytelling's reputations and the politics of perception. As founders of the media and research company ENODI, Michael has translated research into real-world impact. His work produced recommendations adopted by Meta to reduce COVID-era misinformation on WhatsApp group. His broader work has been featured by NASDAQ, NBC News, The Wall Street Journal, and Tech Policy Press. And also Michael is a two-time TED resident and speaker, with his talk being reached over by 1.3 million viewers across 28 translations. He's also been selected as a John S. Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford, a Tech Policy Fellow at the Aspen Institute, and also has held fellowship at the Harvard University. Michael holds the MPA from Harvard Kennedy School and a BA from Columbia University. Thank you all for being here. And Michael, over to you.
Thank you. I guess I have this mic. Can you all hear me? All right. So, all right. I was experimenting. Anyone recognize this picture or know this picture? So this is a photo of of a trash bin, and it accompanied a story about waste at Harvard University, which I think at the time was I might be wrong about this, was wasting like 2,500 pounds of food every week or something. And this is the image that accompanied that, right? But like, is this the Harvard that you think about? Probably not, right? It's a part of the story about Harvard. Some people might think of Harvard this way in some of these headlines, um, whether it be students skipping class or Harvard hating America or any of these kinds of things or stories about Harvard. But for those of us here, we know that that's more complicated, right? Like this is also Harvard. Harvard's the place that some of you go to school, you work, get educated, teach. There's a complex, broader story happening about Harvard, right? Let me do this with a different context. So, New York City, I'm sure everyone is familiar. I might be familiar with this part of New York. I know there's some people in the room who associate New York with being dirty. um, and rat infested and filled. But this is the New York that most people think about, right? When you think about New York, or the story, the narrative, and the perception about New York, right? But imagine if these were the only stories or context that people had about you, or a group or a community, right? And this formed your perception. Oh, was that the Zoom thing that popped up? Okay. And it formed your perception about the stories being told about a group of people, right? And that that makes the impact of narratives like this um, really important when headline news, other mainstream media, or people don't have access to these communities or groups, right? So this is uh, this is the problem in some storytelling. I don't want to call out all development. I want to be clear here. I don't know if I have enough pauses here. I'm not accusing the development space of being solely responsible for this, but this is the reality of the impact of the stories you tell in the work that you do and the media that people have access to, right? So what is storytelling? So I'm here not speaking to you as an economist, maybe a policymaker, but I tell stories. This is what I do, and I want to be clear about what I'm talking about when I talk about stories, or I refer to stories or storytelling. I know a lot of people think of it as emotional manipulation. You might think of it primarily as novels, things like that. When I'm talking about stories, I'm specifically talking about the use of narrative to provide context, clarity, meaning about people, places, events, and ideas. That those are stories, right? And that is the Rain Dictionary definition of stories. Just to to let you know. So this is the context and framing that we're working with in this particular on this particular talk, right? So stories help us because stories provide context and clarity. It helps us form a perception, right? How we form perceptions about anything, right? It's not shaped just by facts. Narratives can be wide ranging, and perception can become more complex as the ways we think about Harvard, about how people might think about New York or other places. But when the narrative range is narrow, the perception becomes flattened around people, right? So that causes a problem I refer to as perception gaps, right? This is when people are repeatedly exposed to stories of, in this case, war, poverty, disease, helplessness, and crisis. They begin to associate those places and people primarily with deficiency, right? And when there are no equally visible counter stories of things like creativity, competence, complexity, ambition, humor, love, innovation, or normalcy, that negative frame hardens, and it creates a perception gap between the full humanity of the people and the narrow image people carry with them, right? So historically, storytelling has emphasized extreme poverty, suffering, helplessness, crisis, and need, used visuals that rely on jarring reductionist imagery. Framing presents communities through deficiency or crisis. And it's not fabrication, right? They're not making these things up. This is the reality, but it's an incomplete story. And the dominance of that story becomes a problem. So, along with that, so the perception of stories is also impacted by our media, right? Like where you go to find news and information about things. And National Geographic has been a leading publication for decades in framing how a lot of the world looked at the developing world. And in 2014 or 18, sorry, they actually issued an apology for the impact of the stories that they told and how they presented communities of people, right? Because this it affects folks in so many ways that might be unintended, particularly if you're talking about development where people have the capacity, the compassion to solve a problem, and are hyper fixating on reaching people emotionally, but has these negative externalities on other people in those communities who are trying to do work um, and make progress. So places in the West, like the Harvards, like New York, like any other thing, are represented mainly through narrative channels. So there's media, there's music, there's business, politics, entertainment. There's so many things that influence how our perception. All of these entities are telling different and complex stories, but many developing countries don't have the equal access to that, right? If I surveyed this room and asked them how many films that they saw that was produced in South America, might not be a high number, right? Or who's listening to music specifically from Southeast Asia, right? Or can name that artist. But most people in the world could probably name most people on the chart in the U.S. charts, whether it be films, music. Um, you get the point on this. I just want to move this forward. So if we go back to this these images, personally, I most closely associate these kind of images with this campaign called Feed the Children. So in like the late 80s, definitely 90s, there were these very disturbing commercials that I used to walk out of the room when they came on the television. I'm going to show you some of them that I think of as the hallmark of development storytelling gone wrong, or in terms of its impact. So I want to show you some of that so we're all on the same page as to what I'm referring to.
A can of soda, regular or diet. In Ethiopia, for just 70 cents a day, you can feed a child like Jamal nourishing meals. For about 70 cents, you can also buy a cup of coffee. In Guatemala, for 70 cents a day, you can help a child like Vilma get the clothes she needs to attend school. For about 70 cents, you can buy a pack of gum, plain or sugarless. In Central America, for 70 cents a day, you could help a child like Maria, who received an operation to restore her sight. Since 1938, Christian Children's Fund has helped children of many faiths and their communities with food, medical care, clothing, a chance to go to school, or whatever is needed most.
Today, so many children around the world still need your help. And through Christian Children's Fund, you can reach out to one of them by sharing, well, just a little of your pocket change. It takes so little for you to become a special friend to a child in a developing country, but boy, the good it can do is worth more than you can imagine. Why don't you call this toll-free number right now to learn more about CCF? As a sponsor, you can exchange photos and letters with your sponsored child. Every letter you get back will show you the growth and progress you've helped make possible. You'll also receive Child World magazine, which explains why your help is needed so urgently. Sponsorship is just $21 a month. That breaks down to 70 cents a day. So why don't you call now? There's truly no obligation, and we'll send you all the information you need so you can make your decision.
Please call now. With a little of your spare change, you can start to change the life of a child forever.
For Gen Z folks in the room, before people had regular access to websites, people really used to call phone numbers on the television. I'm going to show you one more. This one's about 3 minutes long. Love a child, changing Haiti for the Lord, where all can be restored. We are love a child. We are love a child. Teach them, feed them, reach them. Love a child.
so small he is like a skeleton with skin on it. Arms are no bigger around than a quarter. You can see every bone. And that second child still should be breastfed, but now the mother, her health may not be good. She's interested in breastfeeding that first baby, and meanwhile the second one, he's not old enough to go work in the field with his father, and he is between the first child and the older children who can survive. They call that section of children the little survivors if they live to be 5 years old. And without help, these children will never see their fifth birthday.
So before I get to the pattern, just to throw it out there, what emotions did anyone have? You could call it out, and I'll repeat it for the folks on Zoom since we don't have mics. But you could shout out your thoughts, or if you don't have any, sadness, shame, and guilt. Yeah. What do you think of Haiti from this? If you weren't familiar with Haiti, or you might be familiar with negative headlines about Haiti and you see this, what impression would that give you? It's no trick questions. Poverty, right? That the constant state of crisis, right? And again, this is not made up. This there's children who actually have need. The headlines that we come across about particular violence or things happening there is real, right? But it's a complicated story, right? If I was talking about New York, there's still violence happening in New York. There's crime, but there's prosperity as well. There's a diversity of stories, but certain groups have that more complex narrative. And for the groups who don't have that complex narrative, any kind of story that they receive that's pushed to them um, colors how they think about that community of people. So the pattern in this kind of development storytelling, the stories often emphasize extreme poverty, suffering, helpless, crisis, and need, as you just seen. The visuals rely on jarring, kind of reductionist imagery. The framing presents communities through lack, deficiency, and distress. And the stories may be accurate in part, but the issue isn't that they're being fabricated. It just becomes incomplete when you think of the world of other narratives and stories people have about communities of people. So the adverse impact of this that I want to focus on in this talk is how this affects other people who want to positively impact those communities, right? The distorted perceptions make it harder for entrepreneurs, researchers, advocates, organizers, and institutions to operate. And I'm going to share stories from my work as to how this has impacted me, these kinds of images. It can affect fundraising, trust, credibility, interest, and willingness for people to believe certain things are possible in these places. And they can force people to, and this is, I want to say, my core tension in most of the work that I do, that I spend so much time arguing about the humanity and the capability of the people who I'm trying to serve that I don't even get to talk about what the problem that I'm trying to solve, how I'm approaching the problem, and things like that. So between 2014 and 2018, I co-founded this startup called Z News Africa. So it was a media tech company, and our goal was to focus on the cool stories of the global Pan-African community, right? The war, poverty, and disease stories are really easy to access. So we thought we would aggregate and curate stories to make it easier for people to find other things about the global Pan-African community. And we mostly did it through our mobile app and email newsletter that we built in-house. And in 2014, it was a big deal to have a mobile app at the time. And this is who we were. We were a media tech company trying to solve this problem, trying to serve this very large audience of people. And we, had some success. We got into these accelerator programs. We produced original content. We were operating as a media company. But when I would talk to investors, other people in the space about what I was doing, when I got to the part where I said Africa, then a lot of the conversation became interesting. So these are paraphrase quotes of things that were really said and asked to me, right? So, do Africans even care about news? A VC asked me this, someone who is in charge of investing hundreds of millions of dollars, educated person, really did not believe that Africans read news, like, thought that they were living in the huts, you know, searching for that 75 cents a day or however feed the children frame their their cost of living. He really believed that and uh thought I was like making this up on the I don't believe people in Africa use smartphones, constantly challenged on this. I had to get data from US sources and people still didn't believe that smartphone adoption was happening during this time. I'm not investing in some Nigerian scam thing. This was said to me and my co-founder in a meeting, and neither of us are from Nigeria. He's from Guinea. I'm from Ghana, and but that's what he was associated with. And the how did you forge your data? So we had a really successful promotional campaign on mostly through Facebook, where we got an engagement of I think it was like 1.3 million impressions that month. And I literally showed this person my Facebook account so that they knew that I wasn't making up the numbers. And I was asked, how did you forge your data? Right? I wasn't asked about, we weren't asked about our business model, the technology, how we're going to serve people, where we're getting the stories, all the things that you would ask. We had to spend time humanizing people because the stories that they were most useful, whether it's told through the lens of something like a National Geographic or through the development, made it more complicated for us to do our job. We had to humanize people before we could even talk about the work that we're trying to do. So during that time, when I would talk to other people about this problem, some people wouldn't believe me as to how bad the problem was. So my objective solution to this was um, to use use Google Images, just do a Google search where I put the word Africa in there, and beyond the maps, I just picked the first few images that came up in a search, and these were those images. So one of the last times I gave a presentation using this slide, I've mentioned that I've not done the search since. So I did the search last week because I thought it's like over a decade ago, right? Let's see let's see what's happened, right? So I'll share the results from last week. Now I'll say the photo quality has improved, but the theme hasn't changed very much. And the fun thing about this is any of you can go do this or wherever you search for your images and tell me what you comes up outside of maps. And then I thought, I wonder what comes up for other continents, right? Maybe this is normal. So Australia, kangaroos, of course, right? We all think of kangaroos with Australia. But basically, landscapes, a book about Australia, very nice places, modern things set up here. How about Europe? Some very famous landmarks, the Louvre, tourist cities. So this is what came up with Europe. Asia. some beautiful landscapes, some people, business meeting there that might be tourists or people something, but still some quality images there. South America, uh, Christ the Redeemer, some neighborhood things. There's some animals everywhere. City landscape, looks like a neighborhood, very colorful. Um, Assortment in North America, Golden Gate Bridge, more landscapes. I think that's from a video. Uh, this is from a painting of, I guess part of the stories that are told about how this land was discovered, in some landscapes. And just for fun, I thought no one lives in Antarctica. What is it? Just snow? What comes up for Antarctica? Polar bears, penguins. But I found it intriguing that there were three photos that included people in a place that people don't live, as opposed to some of the others. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me with your search results in videos and images. Maybe it's just Google. I used private browsing, hoping my history didn't impact what I saw. But I think this is objective enough to know that there's still a problem there. So ENODI is my current media research company that I founded after Z News. And ENODI is focused on people with immigrant backgrounds, in the areas of entrepreneur impact, cultural innovations, and identity generally, right? And through ENODI, I started a research project around mobile messaging. So with Z News, we had a mobile app, email newsletter, published original content on our website. We did events, but people like my mother was not getting her news from any of the kinds of things that we shared news on. So I thought, well, this is a significant demographic of immigrant community that I'm not reaching, and she gets a lot of her news from messaging, right? So I prototyped an SMS news thing, and I intended to research messaging as a news delivery service. So I was a Knight Fellow at Stanford, and part of my research was this. I was going to look at news and information, and maybe we can deliver news this way. But and this was a lot of so I uh, joined or was added to a ton of WhatsApp groups, and I just took note of the news information and content that was shared in these spaces. A lot of it was flyers like this, sharing information about Ghanaian communities. So there's religious flyers there, and certain politicians who are very good at producing content that's shared in these spaces. But in February 2020, um, when uh, during the COVID era started, there was all kinds of mis and disinfo and problem kind of content shared in those WhatsApp groups, right? And one of them, this article about why African skin resists coronavirus, nudged me to redirect my focus from looking at this as a news product and thinking, how can I impact the content shared in these groups that are end-to-end encrypted and closed and no way to do any kind of top-down labeling of information. And there's also these kinds of images sharing, let's say, not non-peer reviewed information about COVID-19. But something interesting happened a few weeks after that article was shared. Was a different user in that group shared an article debunking that piece of information, which steered my focus on the content moderation that wasn't happening in groups because the group moderators themselves did not have any tools to um, influence the activity going on in those groups. They could only kick people out of groups. They couldn't delete messages. They couldn't message the whole group and things of that nature. So um, I developed a prototype for how it might look for admins to have that service. I did a stakeholder map, wrote a policy memo to people at Meta, and had several meetings, did thought leadership on it. And in 2022, they adopted most of these recommendations. So if you use WhatsApp, those admin tools that they introduced came from this research. The focus was to give group moderators the power to at least moderate and manage what was happening in those groups. So pretty, excited and about that. I had that kind of outcome, right? But as I was working on that project, other professionals that I was engaging with for insight, news, and feedback said a lot of other things when I said immigrants, right? So WhatsApp, for a lot of people in the US who don't have connections outside the US, have no idea how big WhatsApp is. And some people thought WhatsApp was some niche thing that I was focused on that had no real impact. So they would forget or pretend to forget what platform I was focused on to basically tell me you're working on something that's useless or not real because it's not impactful in my life. Nobody in my life uses WhatsApp. I was told that Meta wouldn't care about the subgroup I was focused on, had no idea how many people use this thing, or that a platform like that would care how these hyper users are using their platform. And on the challenge on the illiterate thing, so I won't name the publication, but I had a virtual meeting with a woman who runs a mis and disinfo department for global major news publication. And this is when I was early in the process of focusing on those groups. So she asked, "Oh, well, which immigrant groups are you focused on?" And at the time, I was mostly focused on Ghanaian immigrants because that's the community that I'm from. And she said, Ghana, I think the literacy rate there is below 50%. So the misinformation is such a big problem, or really difficult thing to solve because of the literacy, right? And I paused and I was confused, right? So I asked her, I'm doing research on messaging groups where people are reading and writing messages primarily. Where do you see illiteracy impacting the space? Illiterate people won't be able to communicate on this platform. And she paused, right? And it was because she was making a connection to a negative story rather than even just listening to what I was working on, right? She was filling in her own gaps with that kind of thing. And this happens and impacts all kinds of practitioners that I know in a lot of developing global space, whether they're trying to build an initiative or a startup or something, some wild story by someone who should really know better. This is a journalist, right? Engaging with you in this way when you're just trying to solve a problem. So, I mean, I think the solution is tell better stories, right? Where we could start on this thing, right? So, better storytelling, presenting people as human beings, not just symbols of need, right? It means showing the challenges without erasing the complexity, capacity, intelligence, aspiration, creativity, agency of these people. The answer is not only positive stories either. I know that's like a common uh, solution pushed out that we should tell more positive stories. We heard this a lot with Z News. Our goal wasn't to tell more positive stories; it was to tell other stories. So, in fact, so our newsletter, I used a format called the ABCDE, which then stood for Affairs, Business, Culture, Development, Entertainment, as the kinds of stories that we told. Could be negative or positive. The sentiment is not as important as having more and complex stories to tell. And the complexity is like not a luxury, right? It's not an extra. Like, yes, you're trying to solve an acute problem, but this is not like a convenient, if we have the luxury of time. Like, complexity is accuracy. Um, in these situations. So I am not arguing that the suffering is fake. I just want to make clear here, and that difficult reality should be hidden, right? But the dominant storytelling style used in a lot of development often presents people as overly narrow, flattening, dehumanizing in ways that has downstream consequences on folks like me, other builders, maybe in the room, that are not properly being accounted for. So if you still believe that telling stories this way is successful for you and your initiative, I might not be able to change your mind, but you should know you're contributing to a problem for other people by choosing to tell stories in this way. So, for folks who feel like it's working, right? This is what drives empathy, but people won't care unless the story is told this way. This is unfortunate, but it works. Some audiences need simple emotional stories to even care about other human beings. That's what you're thinking. I mean, I'd love to debate you. I just disagree. Um, I don't think the question is not simply how do we make people care. It's about what kind of understanding are we creating when we make them care. How we decide to tell that story about the people in our work. So moving forward, if a storytelling method raises support while also reinforcing harmful perceptions, that trade-off should be examined, or at least owned by the people who are telling those stories in that way. The dominant stories about people train the world to see them through suffering. Even well-intentioned storytelling may help sustain these very limitations it claims to solve, and it may mean organizations are targeting the wrong audiences. If you are thinking that I can only get through to these kinds of people this way, maybe those are not the people you should be focused on telling stories to, and using what I think are lazy storytelling habits and underestimating people's ability to engage more humanely. I know we live in a time where it's maybe difficult to be optimistic about human beings, but I am overly optimistic about human beings, uh, especially in our ability to listen and uh, resonate with stories. Stories are how we all communicate. I meant to say this earlier. We all communicate through stories. All of you communicate through stories naturally. You just don't professionally. So if I asked you what you want to do as a career, if I asked you about what you did yesterday, you would probably tell me a story. But if you put it down on paper, you're probably communicating bullet points, right? So don't lose the narrative on that. So, I mean, my hope is that, in the future, hopefully near future, if people search for Africa, maybe they see some other images that shouldn't be very hard, that are actually honest and maybe more representative and complex about um, the people the stories are being told about. So I'll take your questions, unless you want me to keep up there. Thank you. let's, let's have some joy, right?
I'll pass the
Hi, Michael. Thank you for being here. We often hear that stories change hearts, but data changes policy. So, however, you've noted that the dominant narratives, such as the story of the helplessness, can actually skew how capital flows. So, my question is, for those of us looking to influence the development outcomes, what is the first step in quantifying the power of an intentional narrative that can compete with the hard traditional economic indicators in a policy memo? Thank you.
What? But no, hold on to that. Why do you need to quantify? Like,
Yeah,
what is the like? Why not do it? Like, yeah.
like in order to convince that like something is should be on the top of the agenda of some policy memo. So normally we use some economic data, right?
Yeah.
So if we try to like utilize or leverage the power of the narrative. So how should we do it? Thank you.
So you, you should definitely use data, right? So I'm arguing that you're already telling stories, right? You can tell them differently. So I mean, if you give me an example of a cause that you're working on, I could probably give you a more specific answer to that. Just give me an example. Like is what kind of data is being used for what initiative that you think might be currently done in a harmful way, and then I can tell you how that might be different because this is too yeah. Any specifics?
Or can you give me an example? Like just now you say you were talking to some investors in Africa. So they said, what, this is Africa. So can you give me an example, like how you convince those investors, not just like Africa is always sometimes portrayed as underdeveloped, but in that way it may always receive international aid, but what we really want is to build like attract foreign direct investment to invest in a long term but more sustainable way. So how do you use the narratives? How do you leverage the power of narratives in order to attract those kind of long term locally led investment? Thank you.
So, I mean, depending upon your initiative, it might not be your job or your work to also change people's mind and push your own initiative and raise money and do those things. I could just say for you, so that Google Africa thing was something I developed as a way to cut through someone's story using something objective, right? People think of Google as objective, and it visually demonstrated that this story that I'm telling is credible, right? Like these are literally the first images that come up. And you can find little ways to uh, tell short stories using data and evidence that just challenges what somebody might assume, right? Me, I don't think you should spend your time trying to do the work that, you know, journalists, media should be doing. But when you're telling the story about your own work, I don't think you should appeal to people's sympathy and pity in that way, just because they're used to hearing the story in that way, right? It's like um, I can't remember the specific person in my network working on, maybe it was a film or something, and a title that they came up with was "Dear God, why are we so poor?" Right, and as someone from the place that the story is being told, I at least uncomfortable along with other emotions, right? But if you're playing into assuming that this is the only way I can tell stories to raise money for this thing, then you're contributing to the problem. I'm just saying that you're also talking to a human being about human beings. Uh, Leaning into like degrading uh, angles is not the only way to do it. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
Thank you so much. This was a really interesting presentation. I think as you were presenting, I was thinking of the rise of social media and how that's made it much easier for people to come in and share their stories. There's a much lower barrier to entry. So I was thinking of how the issue is not now how to put your story out there, but to change the narrative around maybe your community or the issue that you're passionate about. So I was just curious, in your opinion, how we can actually focus on shaping the narrative so that when you go into spaces like the investor meeting that you were mentioning, that those types of narratives are also very much present in their communities as well.
for sure. Good point. So the thing about social media and digital media is that we're all publishers now, right? So we can put out whatever narrative we'd like to who we'd like as well. We could also target people who are most likely to resonate with the story we're telling in the way that we tell it. And I would edge towards that. Like I know the conversation is drifting towards changing people's mind and perception, and I think that's a different conversation of which if they invite me back, I have a lot of thoughts on. But when you're focusing on your own initiative, Yes, leverage social media, digital media, any way you can tell that story and target people who that would appeal to, and maybe stretch it, make it more available to other people who would be receptive to getting other images that they just don't have access to, right? So now you can be very strategic and use data and tools to not just put it out there, but directly serve people with that news and information. There's a lot of tools that I wish existed back when we had Z News that I would definitely use now. Are you working on an initiative now, or? Okay, well, good question. Oh, hardball question coming.
Now we actually have a question from our virtual audience, so I'll read it out loud. So this person says Africa is a myth of otherness created by Europeans. Hold on. Oops. Sorry, it's a little tricky to read. A good starting point for us would be to collectively acknowledge this. If we agree that there are, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, guys. If we agree that there are systemic barriers derived from the colonial legacy which have dehumanized Africa's thought and being, how do we dismantle the colonial library? So it was a hard question.
Well, so I mean, I have some thoughts on that I would have to give you clarity and context around before I could. That's a really big question, and I don't know that. I'll put it this way. So I believe I'm in a room of folks who might start initiatives, be working on initiatives, might be future economists. So I'm thinking from the lens of I do this work. How am I going to tell stories to make people care and engage and support that work, right? And that's something very separate than dismantling like global narratives that have gone on for centuries at this point. So I'll say if see that ID asks me back or a different center, I can do a talk on that because there are very specific things. But I will say that knowledge of this shouldn't stop you from doing the work, right? And it shouldn't discourage you, right? That cannot become the work that you do is changing people's minds and taking on this larger mission. You have a focused mission to accomplish that, knowing that these roadblocks happen, right? Like this was my thinking with the research on WhatsApp in those groups was I'm going to focus on solving this problem. I can't solve uh, people's bias or prejudice or all those things, but I can do this and I can deliver a win for these groups of people that will positively impact other people, right? Because it's not just immigrant communities on WhatsApp. I would say focus on winning in that specific space, but feel free to contact me or find me for a longer answer if you really want to know what I think. on that.
Thank you so much for the presentation. My name's Amna. I'm a first year MPP. I kind of had a question about so in the scenarios or cases, for example, specifically in the fundraising space, we're trying to raise funding for a specific cause and you're trying to meet a target and like time is of the essence. And you're really trying to like evoke people's emotions so they can actually donate. A lot of the times, the tactic that some of these organizations use is that I guess they show you the struggles of some of these families. They tell you their stories. And yeah, some of it has like a negative connotation, but it's their actual story, and that's what evokes emotion and can sometimes be effective. So I guess how do you reconcile these two things of you trying to evoke emotion so you can fundraise, but also not showing a negative story and showing those negative connotations? Like how do you balance these two things, I guess?
So one way is to just not flatten the people, right? Like if the cause is about, let's say, a disease that's affecting a young person, you can humanize them. You can interview one of their parents about how this is affecting them. You can make them human beings and they can explicitly talk about all the ways that this thing is negatively impacting their child, their family, and other people, right? As opposed to simply just showing images of them in strife, crying, in pain. You don't know their name, you have no context. You just see this image of them and other people just in this starving thing. You don't see their parents. You don't see you don't have any other context but that. Just humanize the story more. Tell stories about human beings. See it as a human being is one way to start. Like you don't have to shy away from the facts and evidence and reality of the actual problems and how it's impacting people. It's important. And yes, people knowing that and wanting to help is a way to motivate them. But pity is not the only thing that motivates people, right? Sometimes inspiration does, sometimes wanting to solve a problem does, sometimes just relating, right, as a human being in some other way. There's lots of other emotions to use other than just traumatizing people. Yeah.
This may get us a little bit away from the development focus, so if it's not appropriate for here, but I'm curious if in your research, how much you've done on storytelling within African contexts.
Uh, which are you talking about, like tales storytelling? Are you talking about like business storytelling? Are you talking about development storytelling?
Essentially, ideas that people may hold about other people that influence the way that they interact or choices that they make.
So a lot of professionals that are in my circle who are either trying to build an enterprise or solve a problem are essentially deciding one or two paths. And a lot of people do decide that I'm going to tell this story in the sympathy way because it already resonates with the perception that these people have. And I don't want to meet that resistance. I just need to get this access to capital. And unfortunately, it's a very popular way for people to do it. And it comparatively makes people like me appear difficult because I'm not playing the game in that way. Like I'm literally saying, hey, these are human beings, and people are like, what are you, like, what are you doing? Why are you making me uncomfortable? But I'm sure there are other tracks. But the simple answer is, a lot of people lean into the path that's established because it works, because they're just trying to get something done. And other folks like me try differently, and a lot of people get discouraged. They don't get the funding that they need. They get exhausted, and then they leave the space, right? And you become very aware of this when you are pitching people from your community versus outside the community, right? Because if there are wealthy people on the continent, there are people who can help, and you don't tell those stories to them, right? Like, in fact, there's some I know we're at HKS here, and I hope I'm not calling anyone out, but there are a lot of African business leaders who get invited to places like Harvard, and of course, places like Harvard, want to prime you for a donation. This is how these universities work, and they're told the stories in these ways, which offends them. They're polite about it, but they are like, "What is this?" Like, I run a refinery or whatever. I have these things, I have these resources, and this is how you're pitching my involvement, right? They find it offensive, but people don't even realize that the story is offensive. They think that, oh, this is stories about your people. This is what we're doing, right? It's so complicated, and I'm not sure how to set the table in a way broadly that people can become more aware of what they're doing, or how these conversations are happening, so that they can just be more successful in what they're doing. Because again, I think most people are compassionate. They do want to solve the problem. They just want to get it done, and they're not thinking about how telling that story in that way is just causing other problems for other people.
Yes. Okay. Thanks for your talk. Thanks for your time. You talked about misperception gaps, right? And how to close those. What's your take, for example, on movies outside of Africa on Africa? I'm gonna give an example, like the Black Panther. Like, what do you think this helps with this problem, or does it not help? How do you think about that? Thank you very much.
I think it. I guess it depends on who you ask because so it's actually so having the I guess representation of it and it being a black director, black cast kind of thing, and that is helpful. I know people who have issues with like the specific story that was told in Black Matter, and think that that is like I guess making a CIA agent like a good guy in the film makes people think what kind of story am I really being told? So I guess my answer is it's complicated, right? Because there's different levels to the story being told. There's this film that has this imagery. I'm sure there's a lot of young people or kids who love to see all of these African folks as superheroes and powers. It's a cool thing, and they're not going to pick up on those details that like older people will, who might question the story. But in general, I think it's better to have more stories out there, right? That just complicate the narrative. I don't know that I know all the best ways to tell stories that represent people in all the best of ways. I just think that we should have more stories and more people telling them, particularly the people of those communities.
That's good. Thank you
My
so
time
much,
up?
Michael, for such an
Thank you,
inspiring talk
folks.
today. We have a small
Oh, wow.
gift from the center.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you everyone for coming here. Please, when you head out, feel free to scan the QR code. So it's going to help us for future events planning. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Did I go over? Thank you.